What started as a routine police stop outside a shopping mall took an unexpected turn when federal agents arrived on the scene, and what officers discovered next left them stunned. A black teenager found himself at the center of an intense confrontation in a parking lot that few could have predicted. What began as police approaching him escalated quickly. But just as tensions reached their peak, something extraordinary happened. 10 FBI agents suddenly surrounded the scene, forcing officers to freeze in their tracks. This is the story of how a chance encounter revealed something far bigger than anyone initially realized, and how one young man's day changed everything. Before we dive in, let us know where you're watching from, and make sure to subscribe. Tomorrow's story is one you won't want to miss. The afternoon sun filtered through the glass doors of Westfield Mall as Marcus stepped inside, the cool air conditioning providing immediate relief from the heat outside. It was a Saturday, one of those rare days when he had managed to finish his schoolwork early and convince his mother to let him head to the mall with his friends. He felt lighter than usual, unburdened by the weight of assignments and expectations that typically crowded his weekends. Today was supposed to be simple, just some time with his friends, maybe grab a bite to eat, browse the stores, and enjoy the freedom that came with being 16 and trusted enough to navigate the mall on his own. Marcus moved through the corridors with the comfortable familiarity of someone who had visited this mall dozens of times before. The familiar storefronts, the electronics shop, the clothing boutiques, the food court, all blended into a comfortable backdrop for his afternoon. He was dressed casually in a gray hoodie and dark jeans, nothing that would draw attention, nothing that stood out from the dozens of other teenagers scattered throughout the mall on a Saturday afternoon. He had his phone in his pocket, his wallet with a modest amount of cash his mother had given him, and a sense of contentment that came from a day that was unfolding exactly as he had hoped. His friends were meeting him near the central atrium, and he took his time getting there, stopping briefly to look at some sneakers in a shop window. He found himself smiling at the thought of the conversation they would have, the jokes they would share, the usual banter that made these outings feel like a break from the pressures of school and home. At 16, these moments of normalcy felt precious, time when he wasn't being scrutinized or questioned, time when he could just be a regular teenager enjoying his weekend. As the afternoon progressed, Marcus and his friends moved from store to store, laughing and talking about school, upcoming exams, and the latest music. They grabbed lunch at the food court, sitting at one of the plastic tables and sharing fries while debating which movie they might see next. Everything felt ordinary, unremarkable in the best possible way. Marcus felt the kind of ease that comes from being with people you trust, in a place you know well, doing exactly what you want to do. Eventually, as the afternoon began to wind down, Marcus decided to head outside. The mall had started to feel a bit crowded, and he wanted some fresh air. He said goodbye to his friends, who were heading to another store, and made his way toward the exit that led to the parking lot. The transition from the climate-controlled interior to the warm outside air was sudden, and he squinted slightly as his eyes adjusted to the brighter sunlight. He pulled out his phone to check the time and see if his mother had sent any messages about when she would pick him up. It was at this moment, as he stood in the parking lot with his phone in hand, that Marcus first noticed the police cars. They weren't particularly close to him at first, but something in the way they were positioned caught his attention. His relaxed demeanor shifted slightly. He had been raised with certain awareness, the kind of awareness that many black teenagers carry about interactions with law enforcement. It wasn't paranoia, but rather a learned caution, a knowledge that situations could change quickly and unexpectedly. Marcus continued walking slowly, trying to appear casual, though his mind had begun to race with questions. Why were the police here? Were they looking for someone? He glanced around at the other people in the parking lot, trying to determine if there was some obvious reason for the police presence. His heart rate had picked up slightly, that natural response to an unexpected shift in the atmosphere around you. And then he saw them turning toward him. Two officers, their eyes fixed in his direction, their body language purposeful and deliberate. In that instant, Marcus's peaceful Saturday afternoon came to an abrupt end, and everything changed. Officer Reynolds and his partner, Officer Hayes, had been cruising through the mall parking lot, responding to a report called in earlier that afternoon. Dispatch had received information about a black male teenager, approximately 16 years old, matching a description related to a theft that had occurred at a nearby electronics store 2 days prior. The report was vague. No clear identification, just a general description that could have applied to thousands of teenagers in the area. Yet this vagueness was precisely what would set the day's events in motion. When the officers spotted Marcus standing alone in the parking lot, phone in hand, something about his appearance seemed to match the description they had been given. Officer Reynolds made the decision to approach and conduct what he termed a routine stop. The two officers exited their patrol car and began walking toward Marcus with deliberate purpose, their hands resting near their belts, their expressions serious and focused. Marcus's instinct was to remain calm, to cooperate, to do everything right. He had been taught this his entire life by family members concerned about his safety. As the officers approached, he put his phone away and stood still, trying to appear non-threatening, his hands visible at his sides. "Hey, how's it going?" Officer Reynolds called out as they got closer, his tone casual, but his demeanor rigid. "We need to talk to you for a minute." Marcus's mouth had gone dry. "Sure, officers. Is something wrong?" he asked, his voice steady despite the anxiety rising in his chest. Officer Reynolds began asking questions. His name, where he lived, why he was at the mall. Marcus answered each one truthfully and directly, offering more information than was asked for, hoping that transparency would clarify the situation quickly. But instead of the questions ending, they intensified. "You mind if we search your backpack?" Officer Hayes asked, though his tone suggested it wasn't really a question. Marcus didn't have a backpack, he had only his phone and wallet. But the request itself signaled that this was no longer a casual conversation. This was an investigation, and Marcus was the subject of suspicion. "I don't have a backpack," Marcus replied carefully. "I just have my phone and wallet. You're welcome to look if you need to." He attempted to keep his voice level, but he could feel his pulse quickening. The officers exchanged glances, something unspoken passing between them. What happened next became a series of small moments that accumulated into something larger and more threatening. Officer Reynolds asked Marcus to turn around, to place his hands behind his back. When Marcus asked why, Officer Reynolds' voice hardened. "Just do it. Now." The command was sharp, authoritative, leaving no room for negotiation. Marcus complied, his mind racing with confusion and fear. As the officers began to pat him down, their touches became increasingly forceful. They were looking for weapons, for evidence of theft, for anything that might justify their suspicion. But there was nothing. Just the wallet with a small amount of cash and his school identification. Yet the physical intensity of the interaction didn't diminish. Officer Hayes began to grip Marcus's arm tighter than seemed necessary, and when Marcus instinctively tried to pull away slightly to ease the pressure, Officer Reynolds interpreted it as resistance. "Don't move," Reynolds commanded, his voice now carrying an edge of aggression that hadn't been there moments before. Marcus froze, acutely aware that any sudden movement could be misinterpreted, that any action could escalate what was already a tense situation. His heart was pounding in his chest, his breathing becoming shallow. He was doing everything right, following every instruction, yet the situation was spiraling. Other mall visitors were beginning to notice, stopping to watch the scene unfold. Marcus felt a deep sense of humiliation and fear wash over him. He was being treated like a criminal. His Saturday afternoon transformed into a nightmare, and he couldn't understand why. Officer Reynolds stood close to his face, his eyes intense. "We have a report matching your description. You need to tell us the truth about where you were 2 days ago." The accusation hung in the air between them, and Marcus realized in that moment that he was in a situation far more serious than a simple case of mistaken identity. The officers believed they had found their suspect, and they seemed determined to prove it. The tension in the parking lot had reached a breaking point. Officer Reynolds was still pressing Marcus for information about his whereabouts 2 days prior, his voice growing more aggressive with each question. Marcus's heart was pounding so hard he could barely hear himself think. Other shoppers had gathered at a distance, filming on their phones, their worried expressions a reflection of the intensity of the scene. Officer Hayes maintained his grip on Marcus's arm, and the situation felt like it was teetering on the edge of something far worse. Then, everything stopped. The sound came first, the distinct screech of tires and the rumble of multiple vehicles entering the parking lot at high speed. Officer Reynolds paused mid-sentence, his head turning sharply toward the noise. 10 black SUVs, unmarked but unmistakably federal, came to rapid stops around the perimeter of the parking lot, forming a strategic perimeter around the scene. The vehicles seemed to materialize all at once, their sudden appearance creating an immediate and palpable shift in the atmosphere. The doors of the SUVs opened in synchronized fashion, and federal agents began emerging, 10 in total, all dressed in dark blue windbreakers with large gold FBI lettering across the back. They moved with military precision, their movements coordinated and purposeful. Each agent was visibly armed, their bearing professional yet commanding. They didn't run toward the scene. Instead, they moved with deliberate calm, spreading out in a formation that effectively surrounded the 3 individuals in the center of the parking lot: Marcus, Officer Reynolds, and Officer Hayes. The effect was immediate and striking. Officer Reynolds's face went pale. His eyes widened as he processed what was happening, his mouth opening slightly, as if he wanted to speak, but couldn't find the words. The aggressive posture he had been maintaining collapsed almost instantly, replaced by visible confusion and alarm. Officer Hayes's grip on Marcus's arm loosened noticeably, though he didn't release it entirely. Both officers looked at each other, then back at the agents, their entire demeanor shifting from aggressive authority figures to uncertain subordinates faced with something far larger than themselves. The lead FBI agent, a tall woman with sharp eyes and a commanding presence, approached the group. Her name was Special Agent Morrison, and she moved with the confidence of someone accustomed to controlling situations. Behind her, the other 9 agents fanned out, maintaining positions that suggested they were there for a reason: protection, security, or perhaps to prevent the situation from escalating further. Their presence alone seemed to change the rules of engagement entirely. "Officers, I'm Special Agent Morrison with the Federal Bureau of Investigation," she said, her voice clear and authoritative, cutting through the stunned silence that had fallen over the parking lot. "We need you to step away from the individual." It wasn't a request. It was a directive, and it was delivered with a tone that left no room for negotiation or questions. Officer Reynolds immediately released Marcus, and Officer Hayes followed suit, finally letting go of the young man's arm. Both officers seemed to shrink slightly, their earlier confidence evaporating into confusion and concern. They exchanged glances that suggested they were desperately trying to understand what was happening and why the FBI had suddenly arrived on scene. The crowd of onlookers, which had been filming the confrontation, now turned their phones toward this new development. The sudden arrival of 10 FBI agents in a shopping mall parking lot was not something people witnessed every day, and the shock reverberated through everyone present. Special Agent Morrison turned her attention to Marcus, her expression shifting from stern authority to something closer to concern. "You're safe now," she said simply, then turned back to the officers. "We've been investigating this matter. This individual is not your suspect. He's actually a witness to something we've been working on, and we need him to come with us." The revelation hung in the air like a thunderclap. Officer Reynolds's confusion deepened. They had been pursuing what they believed was a legitimate lead, and suddenly they were being told not only that they were wrong, but that the young man they had been interrogating was connected to something significant enough to warrant a full FBI response team. The parking lot had transformed from a scene of escalating confrontation into something entirely different. The power dynamic had shifted completely. What moments before had been an aggressive police stop was now a federal operation, and Marcus found himself caught between 2 different worlds. No longer the target of local law enforcement, but now apparently someone important enough to warrant the attention of federal agents. Special Agent Morrison led Marcus away from the officers and toward one of the black SUVs, her demeanor professional yet reassuring. As they walked, she began to explain the situation, her words revealing a story far more complex and significant than anyone in that parking lot could have anticipated. What had started as a simple case of mistaken identity was actually the intersection of 2 very different situations, one unfortunate, one extraordinary. 6 months prior, the FBI had launched an investigation into a sophisticated identity theft and fraud operation that had been operating across multiple states. The operation was extensive, targeting vulnerable individuals and stealing their personal information to open fraudulent accounts and commit financial crimes. The investigation had been ongoing for months, with federal agents working to identify the criminals behind the scheme and, more importantly, to identify and locate the victims whose identities had been stolen. Marcus's older brother, Deshaun, had been one of those victims. 3 years ago, Deshawn had been the subject of identity theft when someone had stolen his personal information and used it to open credit accounts and make purchases totaling over $50,000. For years, the family had struggled with the aftermath. Deshawn's credit destroyed, his name attached to debts he didn't incur, and the emotional toll of being violated in such a fundamental way. The local police had been unable to help, and the case had seemed to disappear into the bureaucratic void. But the FBI investigation had changed everything. Through their sophisticated digital forensics and coordinated efforts across multiple jurisdictions, the federal agents had begun to piece together the identity theft ring. They had identified the perpetrators, traced the schemes, and most importantly, they had identified hundreds of victims, including Deshawn. As the investigation deepened, they realized they needed to speak with the victims to gather additional information and evidence that would help prosecute the criminals. Deshawn had been contacted by the FBI 3 weeks earlier, and he had been cooperative in providing information about his experience. However, when federal agents attempted to verify certain details about the account openings, they discovered something unexpected. During their investigation, they had uncovered that one of the fraudsters had attempted to use Deshawn's identity information once more, about 2 months ago, to open yet another account. This new attempt had been flagged by the bank's fraud detection system and had led the FBI to examine the incident more closely. The investigation had revealed that this secondary attempt appeared to have been made from a specific location in the city, and digital forensics had narrowed down the time frame and location to the very mall where Marcus now found himself. The FBI, working with local credit card companies and digital payment systems, had been attempting to identify who had made this attempt. They had been monitoring the mall's entrances, parking lot camera footage, and payment terminals, waiting for someone matching a certain profile to appear. When Marcus had arrived at the mall that afternoon, his appearance on the parking lot cameras had triggered an alert in the FBI's monitoring system. Not because Marcus was a criminal, but because his physical location matched patterns in their investigation. Marcus, it turned out, bore a strong resemblance to Deshawn, his older brother, and the artificial intelligence program the FBI was using to identify potential suspects had flagged him based on facial similarity algorithms and location data. Rather than a criminal, Marcus was actually a crucial witness. His presence at the mall that day, combined with the fact that he was Deshawn's younger brother, suggested he might have information about when and how his brother's identity was being targeted. The FBI had been hoping to speak with him, to conduct a voluntary interview that might provide additional context about the identity theft scheme. When the local police had stopped Marcus, they had no idea they were intercepting someone who was already the subject of a federal investigation, not as a suspect, but as a potential witness. The FBI, monitoring the situation through their own channels and observing the police interaction escalating, had decided to intervene immediately. They couldn't allow local law enforcement to mishandle what they knew to be a sensitive witness in an ongoing federal investigation. As Special Agent Morrison explained all of this to Marcus during the drive away from the mall, his confusion slowly transformed into understanding. He wasn't in trouble. He was, in fact, connected to something much larger, an investigation that might finally bring justice for his brother and hundreds of other victims whose lives had been disrupted by the identity theft ring. The ride to the FBI field office was quiet. with Special Agent Morrison allowing Marcus time to process everything that had happened. By the time they arrived at the downtown Federal Building, Marcus had begun to grasp the full scope of the situation. He wasn't in legal jeopardy. He was a key piece in a puzzle that had been consuming federal resources for months. The FBI conducted a voluntary interview with Marcus, during which he provided information about his brother's experiences and any interactions he might have witnessed or been aware of regarding identity theft or fraud. Though Marcus's direct knowledge was limited, his cooperation proved valuable in corroborating details the FBI had already gathered. Within the week, the federal investigation reached a critical turning point. Armed with the information they had compiled, including Marcus's testimony and months of digital evidence, the FBI executed coordinated arrests across 3 states. 7 individuals involved in the identity theft ring were taken into custody. The arrests sent shock waves through the criminal network, leading to the recovery of substantial amounts of stolen data and the identification of additional victims who could now take steps to protect themselves and repair the damage done to their financial lives. For Marcus personally, the immediate aftermath involved conversations with his family about what had transpired. His mother was initially frightened when he explained that the FBI had intervened in a police confrontation, but her fear quickly transformed into relief and then gratitude when she learned that his cooperation had contributed to bringing criminals to justice. More importantly, she learned that her older son's years-long struggle with the consequences of identity theft had finally been acknowledged and addressed at a federal level. The FBI's Victim Services team reached out to Deshaun, providing him with resources to rebuild his credit and offering guidance on steps he could take to fully recover from the identity theft. The local police department received significant backlash following the incident. While officers Reynolds and Hayes had been acting on what they believed was legitimate intelligence, their aggressive approach to a teenager who matched only a vague description raised important questions about racial profiling and proper police procedure. The incident sparked conversations within the department about implicit bias training, de-escalation techniques, and the importance of careful verification before conducting investigative stops. The city's police commissioner announced a review of protocols for conducting street stops and interviews, acknowledging that the incident highlighted systemic issues that needed addressing. Video footage recorded by bystanders spread across social media, bringing national attention to the incident. Rather than becoming a story purely about police misconduct, however, it evolved into a more nuanced narrative about the intersection of various systems and failures. News outlets covered not only the aggressive police stop, but also the FBI investigation, the identity theft ring, and the broader implications for victims of fraud. The story resonated with people who had experienced identity theft, bringing visibility to a crime that often operates silently in the background of people's lives. Marcus's experience became a catalyst for broader conversations about several interconnected issues. First, it highlighted the dangers of racial profiling and the need for law enforcement to approach investigative stops with greater care and cultural sensitivity. Second, it shed light on the prevalence and impact of identity theft, particularly how it disproportionately affects vulnerable populations. Third, it demonstrated the importance of federal coordination and the resources available when multiple agencies work together effectively. For Marcus himself, The experience was transformative, though not without its scars. While he had been vindicated and was never charged with any crime, the traumatic nature of the police confrontation left an emotional impact. He found himself more anxious in public spaces, more aware of his vulnerability as a young black man in situations where authority figures made quick judgments based on appearance. Yet he also emerged from the experience with a sense of purpose. He began speaking at community events about his story, advocating for police reform and raising awareness about identity theft. The FBI case ultimately resulted in convictions for all 7 arrested individuals. Restitution orders were issued to help compensate victims, including Deshaun, for financial losses. While no amount of money could fully restore what had been taken, it represented acknowledgement and accountability. Ultimately, Marcus's story became a reminder that systemic problems require systemic solutions. It demonstrated that a single incident could reveal the interconnectedness of racial justice, financial crime, law enforcement reform, and federal coordination. And it showed that sometimes the most unlikely circumstances can catalyze meaningful change, transforming one teenager's worst day into an opportunity for broader societal progress and reflection. If this story moved you, if it made you angry, tense, shocked, and finally satisfied when justice was served, let your voice be heard. Comment wherever you're watching from, and don't forget to like, share, and subscribe for more powerful stories. Because together we can keep rewriting the narrative, one story at a time.